Well there, Tepu, Namaste, Haru Nefer. This is Kasakma Keparu with another broadcast for you. And this broadcast, we're going to be talking about why the ancient Egyptians were Black Africans. But before I do that, I want you to hit that like button on this video. And if this is your first time to my channel, welcome. Hit the subscribe button to get notifications on when I go live and when I upload recorded videos. And we have some free ebooks if you're interested in learning more about my teachings. You can just click on the links below, download ebooks, and start reading today. And also, if you haven't already, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. You can do so for as little as $1 or $20 per month. It's up to you. You will get exclusive access to instructional videos, articles, videos that teach you how to do oracle readings, how to invoke spirits, meditation, proper breathing techniques, qigong, all of that good stuff. And there's no obligation. You can just sign up, like I said, for $1, $20, what have you. If you want to do $5, that's great. Cancel anytime. So again, consider becoming a Patreon supporter. And sometimes we have exclusive things that we give. Like for example, there's going to be a presentation here, and I'm going to offer that to my Patreon supporters directly following this video. They'll get a PDF copy of that. Lastly, please share this video with family and friends so we can get this revolution started. All right, Tepu, how are you? All right, so we have an interesting subject today, very interesting subject that I want to talk about, and that is the ancient Egyptians, my favorite topic. All right, um, it's what I find fascinating is how Hollywood, how the major universities, how television stations like the History Channel, the Travel Channel, can all get on the same page and ignore something that's right in your face in favor of a lie. I don't know how they do it. It's really like surprising to me, you know? Um, and what I'm referring to is that there is a wealth of information and documentation to prove that the ancient Egyptians were indigenous to the continent of Africa. But yet, somehow or another, all of the movies, all of the lessons portray the Egyptians as white from Europe. How is that possible? Maybe we missed something. Well, let's take a deep exploration into this subject matter. And what I want to focus on in this video is not so much the wealth of scientific data to support the idea that the ancient Egyptians were Black Africans, but more so on visual representations, because I think that's really important. I had a friend of mine, she had just went to Egypt to do one of those tours there. She came back and she called me up and she said, Kasank, I saw the hieroglyphics and everything, and they were dark-skinned people. They were brown skin. I said, yeah, surprise, surprise, you know? And it's not like you're looking at one or two representations of darker hue representations. You are looking at just one after another, after another, after another. And it's interesting that when you see stations like the History Channel, they tend to focus on those hieroglyphics that portray the Egyptians as very light skin hue or white. And we'll talk about why that is. And they recycle those images and they show them over and over again. And Hitler said, the way that you get people to believe a lie is you keep repeating the lie. And eventually it becomes, in their minds, the truth. And that's what we have is we have these stations, we have Hollywood, we have universities, all engaged in propaganda. But why would they do such a thing? You see, when you try to claim anything out of Europe, they are first to yell and say, no, these things are from European ancestry. But they're okay with going into Africa and claiming whatever they see fit as theirs. And what they do is they cherry pick. And some, they have some really great European white archaeologists who have been advocates of the truth. And they have stated that they have gone there done the excavations and found evidence of really advanced civilizations. But when they do so, the academic community is quickly to um, credit it to European influence. One of the things I didn't like, and he was a hero of mine until he said this, was Carl Sagan, the astronomer who was predominant, or he made his fame from the show Cosmos. When the Dogons, when they discovered the Sirius star system, what he said was they must have had some help from an outside source, from Europeans. And it was a blatant racist statement, as if they could not have discovered the star system on their own, in which they did. If you go to Africa and you look up at the sky, it is littered with stars, constellations. So you know our ancestors were very much aware of the constellations and what was happening in the heavens. And for Carl Sagan to say something so blatantly racist, it really betrays the doctrine of science, because science is all about facts and information and results. It is not and should not be about racist interpretation or slanting the truth to fit a preconceived notion about a group of people. What we will see here is that there has been a concerted effort to really cover up the truth. And one of the things that we have to get out of is focusing so much on Egypt and Kemet, because there's something that's really big going on here that many of us are not privy to. One of the things you have to understand is that there are a lot of archaeological excavations going on that you don't hear about and that are kept secret, and they're digging things up and they're keeping those things, and they're hidden away. Only the elite scholars have access to it. So you need to be aware of the fact that the information that you're getting has been filtered for mass consumption. The real artifacts, the real Metu Neter hieroglyphics that reveal a lot about our ancestors, are kept and hidden away. And it's unfortunate that we are not in control of that information. But through our own studies, we can reconstruct the history of our ancestors and see how they lived and what they thought about on a day-to-day basis. And what you'll see is that there's a lot of commonality between how they thought, how they lived, and what we're going through in present day. But going back to what I was saying before, is that we have done a really great job in documenting how the ancient Egyptians were indigenous African people. But what we have not done is to really look at the evidence from a wider perspective. And let's look at it this way. Most scholars will agree that civilization reached its zenith in ancient Egypt. It's unparalleled in terms of its engineering of the pyramids and the temples. But when you go deeper into Africa and you start to do the excavations and take a deeper look, you will realize that there were other advanced civilizations that go unnoticed. Many people have been looking for Atlantis, and we've, for the first time, found evidence of that. And of course, the evidence leads us back to Africa. But there were many, many more civilizations. So let us not get caught up on Egypt or Atlantis. Let us start looking at our history and really kind of looking at it from a different perspective now. And let us say that there was a period in history, in time, when the planet itself was at its height in terms of technology and in terms of morality. That Egypt and Atlantis weren't just the only advanced civilizations. There were many, many more. And they're being covered up. In China, they're covering up pyramids. They don't want you to know that there's pyramids in China. So they're really, really working hard to keep this information from us. So that's what I wanted to say before we get into this. I wanted just to really bring about a broader perspective on this, to say it's not just about a cover up when it comes to ancient Egypt. It's a cover up that is global, because at one time the planet was in a state of balance, and now we're out of balance. This is not the way we were supposed to live. This is not the future our ancestors had in mind for us. The timeline has been disrupted. Our progress has been retarded. We're in a stupor state. We're in the dark ages. Compared to our ancient ancestors, we're very primitive now. And when you look at just our thought process, we're backwards in how we think. We are mentally ill in how we think. And we'll see that. And it's also important that when we're going to look at these civilizations and try and prove that they were of indigenous African origins, that we don't get caught up in phenotype, because Africa is a very large continent, and there are many different people in Africa. Some with broad noses, some with straight noses, some with wider lips, some with like very thin lips, some with coarse hair, others with long, smooth hair. So let's not get caught up in all that. Now, the way we do need to look at it is we have to take into consideration many factors that impacted the growth and development of those civilizations there in comparison to Europe. And although I point these things out about Africa having very advanced civilizations, because life did begin in Africa, in the great continent of Pangaea, and that is where life spread out and migrated all over the planet. But that doesn't mean that I'm boasting about Africa and saying that these Black Africans are better than any other group or race on the planet. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that we have to understand that there is only, first of all, one race, which is the human race. Secondly, is that it's been a massive cover up and the spread of disinformation to keep from us the idea of, no, not the Egyptians being Black, but the idea of there was a point in history where the planet was at a state of very advanced culture. But we are told that it was primitive. That's a lie. Because we're finding evidence that our ancestors experimented with batteries. They experimented with electricity. They experimented with portals to different dimensions. They experimented with planes. They were creating test planes to see if they can fly. But everything has to be attributed to Europe, because no other culture, especially African culture, could have developed these things. That's what they want. And when we start looking at the bigger picture, we won't get so self-centered on Egypt and Black people. We have to look at it from what is affecting humanity. When there is a cover-up, when there's a lie, it affects all people, not just one particular race. It affects all people. And that's what we're seeing now. And it's unfortunate that those people who are in the conspiracy theory arena, who are supposed to be Sherlock Holmes and questioning everything, have not questioned the fact that they have lied about ancient Egypt and then gone deeper and said, well, they have lied about history in general. Our history is not true. It's not correct. But it's for some reason that racism is so deeply embedded in them that they can't get past it. And that's unfortunate. It's very unfortunate. There was a gentleman, he has a YouTube channel, I'm not going to mention his name, But he explained to his viewers why he put a swatch sticker on his wrist. And he was saying, well, this swatch sticker is supposed to protect me from parasites and from, I guess, other things, diseases and stuff. And it's not because I'm a white supremacist. So to that, I say, yes, you are a white supremacist. Because are you telling me that you don't know any other sigils? You don't know any other occult symbols that would ward off negative vibrations? There are many. And you so happen to pick this watch sticker. And yet he claims that he's for all people, that he hates racist people. And it's those people who are the strongest racist people that always proclaim that they're not racist and that they hate racist people. Isn't that interesting? Hypocrites. And none are more bigger hypocrites than Hollywood, which time and time again has ignored the truth and put out blatant lies. They know that the ancient Egyptians were not white people. You see, I want you to understand this. As Egypt progressed, it went through a downfall. And it went through its downfall because Egypt is it's in Northeast Africa and it's along the coastal lines. And the coastal lines are very important for trade. And when you're trading with Europe, especially the Greek and Roman empires, you're going to have an influx and a migration of people. This will turn the native population. So what you're going to end up with is similar to LA and New York, which is a cosmopolitan. So Hollywood and the universities bank on that because they want to point to that time and period when Egypt was a cosmopolitan to say that the entire lifespan of Egypt or Egypt's conception was brought about by Europeans. And that's not true. And you'll learn that Egypt lost control simply because of the influx of foreigners. Now, what I want to point out to, as I talked about before, is looking at how the Egyptians saw themselves. And they were very detailed in terms of leaving their history, leaving their knowledge, and they carved it out in stone in what we call the Medunetta. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to show you a little bit about them as our ancestors, because that's exactly who they are. Let's take a look at this. All right, in this presentation, let me start with this. All right. Now, the Egyptians used color to symbolize various different things, but that does not mean that when you see brown or darker skin complexion, that it was an artist taking liberties. Now here we have, of course, a very, very black woman. And let's take a look at what the Egyptian women look like. Now, I'm not going to go and pinpoint the exact time period or dynasties. So let's go look at this. And obviously we can see here that this is a representation of how the Egyptian women saw themselves in dance and music. And I want you to note something very, very important. If you look at the Egyptian women and look at the head, look at the skull, look at the protruding of the jaw. This is what we would call as prognosticism. And you will typically find this. You will typically find this in people of color. And we're going to see more evidence of that. As we go on, here again, we see depictions of the Egyptians. This is common in the temples of Egypt. When you go there, you will see this every place. How Hollywood extrapolates from this and determines that they were white, I have no idea. More, more evidence. This is the Egyptians. And again, look at the protruding jaw, prognosticism. This is not common among European ancestry. And we see here more evidence, and this is a modern day individual in Africa going, and they're demonstrating how he closely resembles this bust of an Egyptian. Now let's look at the condition known as prognosticism. We can see here how the different races, I should say, and how the jaw protrudes. You see here the Caucasoid, it's not protruding as much. Mongoloid, Caploid here. Now notice it's not protruding as much, but this man, you can see he's black, or let's say indigenous African person. Then we see more protrusion here. And what I want to point out that's very interesting is the Sphinx. Let's look at the Sphinx. It is definitely showing prognosticism here, protruding of the jaw. You see, the archaeologists, they know this. They know that these remnants of the skulls, the bodies that exhibit this indicates that they were people of color, melanated people. The idea is that if you exist in a warm, hot climate, such as Africa, you will have a melanated skin complexion, meaning you will be of darker skin hue. And we go down and we'll just see some more. These are portrayal of the ancient Egyptians, and I think also the Nubians as well. African woman, another representation. Again, these are common. This is not made up. Here we go of an Egyptian woman in a later period of Egypt. Now there's an individual you need to be aware of who is one of the historians who's always putting out propaganda, and I'm going to show you. Here we go. This is Josh Gates, and he has a program called the Travel Channel, Expeditions Unknown. So he recently took this bust here, and they did some clay and sculpting, and they came up with what they thought would be a representation of what Queen Nefertiti would look like, which is, of course, a white woman. First and foremost, let's understand that this bust here that he based it off of has been proven to be phony. This is fraudulent. Not only that, if you want to see Queen Nefertiti and her husband, Tutankhamun, we can see them here. Look at the prognosticism and the dark skin hue. Again, how are they taking this and then their interpretation becomes this? This is pure racism, pure prejudice. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the ancient Kemetic people, because one of the things they did was they called themselves the Kamu, and they called Egypt Kemet. Now, what is that? To understand that, here we have Kemet and here we have the Kamu. K-A-M, and the K is interchangeable with the H for Ham. Haman is the etymological root of the Hebrew term Hammond, which is black, Noah's son, Ham, black. The Egyptians called their land Kemet, land of the black. They called themselves the Kamu, the black people. If we looked and let's take a look at this, Africa and Europe. Now, One of the things they cleverly did and still doing in their propaganda, when they talk about Egypt, it's never in context to it's in Africa. It's always when we go to Northeast Africa, to Egypt. No, it's when we go to Africa, they conveniently take Egypt out of Africa and make it a part of Europe. Now, before I mentioned, let's not get caught up in the phenotype, because I want you to understand something clearly about the development of civilizations throughout history. And this is important to keep in mind. Okay? Your development, it's not just about skin complexion. All right? That has a lot to do with it. Of course, darker skin hue, pigmentation, melanin protects you from the sun. White people lack melanin. They didn't need it because they didn't get a lot of sun in Europe. So there wasn't a need for them to develop pigmentation. There was no need for that. So what you need to understand is that the environment, climate impacts not only your skin pigmentation, but the development of how you think. That's very important. See, Neter, or God, wants you to survive. And God, as the Auset faculty or Isis faculty, or nature, Mother Nature, a divine intelligence, works through nature to cultivate and develop us so that we adapt to the climate. So the development of the two great civilizations in Africa and in Europe followed along these lines. We know that there was one massive continent, and from that continent, the indigenous people of Africa spread out throughout the world. And as they settled in different areas in Europe and Asia and so forth, they adapted to the climate. And this not only meant an adaptation of skin complexion, but of how the thought process was. Africa, food was abundant. In Europe, food was scarce. It was a fight for survival in the cold climate. So what do I mean by that? So when you have conditions like that, it forces you to think in a certain way. So people in Europe developed more of their left brain, while people in Africa developed more of the right brain. The left brain is analytical thought, it's detailed, it's ordered sequencing, linear, rational thought, verbal communication, math, science, logic. And it's very individualistic, and it deals in segregative thought process. What does that mean? When you're in Europe and you're fighting for food, you have to think about the individual. You have to think about self. That development means that the left brain is of more key use in your adaptation and survival in that type of climate. Whereas people in Africa could afford to share, to think more about the community. The right brain is intuitive, it's holistic, it's random sequencing, nonlinear, it's emotional thought, it's nonverbal communication, it's creative. Now, when you have a civilization that thinks through both the left and the right hemisphere of the brain, you have dual brain thinking. And that's really how we're supposed to be. But that's not how it happens, because in nature or in our development, you do favor one side over the other. You do use both sides of the brain. Let's get that straight. You always use both sides of your brain, but you depend on more than the other. And unfortunately, in our modern day society, we have been taught to use primarily the left brain. So what happens? You have a society that's based on racism and sexism. You have a society that thinks only in terms of linear, sequential thought. It basically values verbal communication, and it thinks about the individual over the collective. Whereas when you have a right brain, people who focus on that hemisphere of the brain, you think more holistically, and you think about the welfare of others as opposed to just yourself. Now, when you look at the culture of ancient Egypt, the evidence is telling, because one of the things that they did was they celebrated duality. When you see them and their depictions, it's always the male and the female together. This goes back to both hemisphere of the brain, dual thinking. Their very culture was not just about life, but they celebrated life and the afterlife as one complete whole. See, the right brain is always looking for synthesis. It's always looking to see how things can work together in harmony. The left brain is segregative, it's trying to see things separately. So within Europe and European society, you're going to develop tendencies to see things as opposition and separate from you. And in Africa, the development of the right brain, you'll tend to see things harmoniously. So let's coin the left brain as segregative thought faculty and the right brain as synthesis thought faculty. Our modern day society is focused on life. We fear the afterlife. We fear ghosts and spirits because we're predominantly left brain. We don't think holistically. In Africa, the whole idea was to be holistic. This is why the ancestors were celebrated. This is why spirits, ghosts were natural and they weren't to be feared. So when you think about the development of these two civilizations, you need to not only think about skin pigmentation, but you also need to look at how their environment shaped the development of their left and right hemispheres of the brain. And again, the goal is to become dual brain thinking because that is the basis of genius thinking. The great magician, architect, engineer, medicine man, Imhotep was a dual brain thinker. Nikolai Tesla was a dual brain thinker. Modern scientists that are left brain thinkers are fraught with all kinds of problems because you see, the left brain has problems with abstract thought. So, therefore, modern science cannot jive well with religion. They cannot conceive of a God that is immaterial, that is not tangible. Because the Kemetic people, the highest expression of God was Amen or Amun, that which cannot be seen. That concept alone created a lot of problems for philosophers in Europe, in the Greek civilization and the Roman civilization. So they had to personify these things so that it was tangible for them. It was concrete for them because that's how they thought in concrete terms. But African people have no problem with abstract thinking. So this is why they developed very much in terms of the metaphysical, the occult. So make no mistake about this, Hollywood knows the truth. The universities know the truth. Stations like the History Channel, Travel Channel, they know the truth. But they serve bigger masters. And those masters put out the agenda. Because Kemet mastered the occult. And because they mastered these science, that information has to be kept from the general population. And more importantly, it cannot be attributed to people of dark skin complexion. And in fact, much of the wealth of the knowledge of the ancient Kamo people has been taken and hidden away so that you and I will never see that information, so that the elite in secrecy can practice. The great occultist Aleister Crowley, when he was studying the occult, one of his first pilgrimages was to Egypt to communicate with Ba, Tahuti, or Hermes, because most people in the occult arena, especially the ruling elite, know where the source of the true power comes from. This is why Europe, England, is occult central. And try as they may to change the complexion of the ancient Egyptians, what they're going to find out is that the other civilizations are going to stop popping up. And they're going to have to explain those civilizations as to why they're so advanced and why, when they look at the skeletons and the hieroglyphics or the writings left, why are they of dark skin complexion? When you start to understand the fact of how these two civilizations develop from their perspective, being polarized in certain hemispheres of the brain, you will then understand the problems that we're facing in the world today. Our ancestors already solved those problems. They had very little crime. They had no political corruption. They had no serial killers. They had no pedophiles. Because the right brain is the seat of morality. And they were very moralistic. See, they didn't separate church and state. They didn't discriminate against women. And all historians will tell you that Egypt, at that point in time in history, gave women more rights than what they had in Europe at the same time. Women in Egypt could go into politics, could rule. In fact, one of the most noted rulers or kings or queens was the Queen Hatshepsut, who became pharaoh. No one batted an eye. It wasn't nothing unusual. Women had property. They had rights in a divorce. Whereas just recently, women got the right to vote. Why is that? That is because that Egypt, being integrated brain thinkers, dual brain thinkers, knew the importance of the yin principle. They celebrated the other aspects as a completion of the whole. Whereas in Europe, they saw that there was an outside world, and that outside, or whatever it was, opposed you, and you had to look out for yourself individually. So now, if we're looking to get back to that ancient knowledge and the ancient wisdom, it's not going to be about just reading books about what happened or reading about the historical figures. It's going to have to be about reteaching ourselves how to think properly, how to incorporate both hemispheres of the brain. Only then can we reproduce the civilizations of antiquity. You see, you have these backward scholars out there who say, well, we're going to resurrect the wisdom of our ancient ancestors, and we're going to teach our children about them, and therefore we will be able to bring back the civilization. No, you won't, until you deal with how you think and get out of that left brain thinking only, you're not going to do anything. Because this society in present day, because it's a left brain society, has all types of problems. Science in itself is corrupted. And I'm not talking about prejudice or racism. They can't think holistically. Stephen Hawkins is a brilliant man, or was, but he was very left brain. And if our children were being taught from a dual brain perspective, can you imagine where we would be at present day? Inventions. But this society, because it's being ruled by a very elite group who have taken the knowledge of the ancient world and they are practicing it in secrecy, don't want us to advance. They want us to stay in the dark. So what I'm telling you is this. Let us look at ancient Egypt and understand, yes, we're being lied to in terms of it was a indigenous African society, but Egypt was one among many advanced civilizations. I want to recommend a couple of books that you should read that will expand your knowledge on this subject matter. This is Histories by Herodotus, and Herodotus was a Greek historian, and he actually talks about his visit to Egypt and what he saw in terms of the Black people. So you should get that. I've actually kind of like highlighted. Yeah, it says where he talks about seeing a black dove, and he equated that black dove to an Egyptian woman. So this is a great book. Another book that's really good to get is by Richard Poe, All Black Spark, White Fire. This is where he did a reconstruction of an Egyptian man, I believe it was. And he determined that the Egyptian man was a black African, in other words. And it's a very detailed book that really gets into science. And you'll see some stuff there. And as he's reconstructing the skull and what this Egyptian person looked like. And actually, he did very similar to what Josh was doing, Josh Gates with Nefertiti, in terms of rebuilding the bust or the head. But he told the individual that was doing the sculpting, he says, don't put, even though it may seem like it's leaning toward Negroid features or black features, I want you to hold back a little and be a little conservative. And the sculptor did so. And still, what he came out with was a very African looking person. So this is a good book to get. One of the things that we have to look at too is that the metaphysical implications of this. Our ancestors were very, very into the occult, or let's just say spirituality. We have to get back to that because that is where the power lies. We should practice economic upliftment, political upliftment, but we need to also focus on the spiritual aspect because by nature, we are a very holistic people. And linear left brain religions are not going to work well with us. We will tolerate them for a while, but we were not meant to study and worship those plagiarized versions of our religion, because that's essentially what Europe did. Was just took, well, it actually started with the Greeks, and the Greeks took the Kemetic gods and then tilted over to Rome. And while I'm on that subject, let me share with you. Um, let me go back to share with you this. I want to show you this because this is very important. This is actually a calendar of the events or the major historical time periods in ancient Egypt. And what you need to understand here is you have the first intermediate period, the Middle Kingdom, the second intermediate period, is that they really want to focus on those particular periods in history where you have very clear indications in their mind that the Egyptian figures were white, such as Cleopatra, which is the Potomac Egypt in 332 to 30 BCE. Now, the BBC already did a special on that, and they determined that she was of a darker skin hue, again, by the prosnosticism in her skull, or not her skull particularly. I think they found her sister. But I want you to understand that these figures like Nefertiti, Cleopatra, you see, let me show you this. The reason that they're focusing on Nefertiti here is because she has European features. They're not going to show you the many, many other queens like Queen T, Hatshepsut, and many more that had very clear African features, very clear. But they have to stick with these, which they recycle over and over again. And it's propaganda. That's all it is. And let me see if I can bring up a picture of, yeah, here she is, Queen T. All right, let me share my screen so you can see her. She was actually a badass too, but they really don't want to focus on her. All right, so let's see her right here. Okay, there she is, Queen T. And as you can see, she exhibits the prosnosticism, and it looks like she has a little afro going on there. But see, that doesn't fit their narrative. You see, it actually betrays their narrative because they have to keep the lie going. Ancient Egypt was populated by white-skinned people. Look at this woman. Look at her. That's an African woman. And it's not as if she wasn't influential in Egypt. She was a major badass. Nefertiti did nothing of any importance in ancient Egypt. But why would they focus on her? Because again, she has European features. Do you understand what I'm saying here? It's just propaganda. Another perspective on her. Get a little closer there. Looks like some of my aunts, you know. But when you read her history, you'll see that she was a very commanding, assertive woman. There's very little you will gather in the way of Nefertiti in terms of any accomplishments that she did. Her accomplishment was marrying Tutankhamun. That was her accomplishment. Okay. And we see here full lips here. Okay. This one really demonstrates the, again, prosnosticism. And here we go again. Them with their portrayal. See, they get away with this because they only show you when Egypt was on its decline during the occupation of Rome. So they want to show you all of these white European Egyptians. But because of that migration of the Greeks and the Romans to Egypt and the Roman takeover of it, it was basically destroyed. The culture, the history, the temples. The Arabs then came along and raided the temples, destroyed the pyramids, took the limestone off the pyramids because the pyramids had beautiful limestones on them. So anyway, I digress. Let me just stop that. Let's go back here. So it's not just a matter of us teaching our history, but we also must get back to learning the secrets, the occult wisdom, the occult knowledge, because the Egyptians didn't separate that from science. They didn't separate that from everyday living. It was all one. So we have to get back to that. We can't just teach names and dates. We have to look at how our ancestors lived on a day-to-day basis, what they believed in, which was Ma'at, and incorporate that, practice that, and live that. So with that, I just want to say thank you, Magi's, for tuning in. And what I'm going to do, because I think with that, I think these pictures are really very telling. So what I want to do is I'm going to make these available up on Patreon for my supporters if you like to get a download of this. And also, if you are inclined to, please don't forget, you can donate to the channel so I can continue bringing you more programs like this. And I'll do another one in the future where we'll get into actually the data, the information, the melanin tests, and how they play tricks to confuse the matter, such as selecting certain mummies to do the carbon dating and things of that nature, so it fits their narrative. And right now, what they're trying to put forth as their lie is that King Tut was, like he has genetically DNA from Europe. So, this is what they're doing. So I want to thank you all for tuning in today. This is Kasak Ma Keparu, son of Maat and Tahuti. My aunt is the beautiful goddess Heteru. Until my next broadcast, Amun Ra.